Hello, I hope everybody out there is coping alright in these times. I'd like to go back, maybe, it could be better times, I don't know, to the very early 70s. The Beatles were splitting and the four members were beginning to make an effort to record solo albums. And Ringo started his in late '69 and it was released in March of 1970, and this is the one. It's called Sentimental Journey, and it is a collection of pre-rock and roll, I would guess you would call it, pre-rock and roll standards from the 1940s, probably from when Ringo was growing up. He was born in 1940, so he would have heard these on the radio, no doubt. And this is what it is. And that there is a collection, is a song selection. All, like I say, standards from the 40s. And the cover, that is a pub called the Empress. I believe it's still standing. It's near to where Ringo lived as a boy in Liverpool. And in the window got photographs of Ringo's family, and there's Ringo down there. There's a nice old-fashioned lorry down there which I can remember as a boy seeing those driving about on the roads, so that's some memories looking at that. Yeah, so the music contained on here isn't what you would have expected from an ex-Beatle at the time. I think Ringo's sort of excuse at the time was, "I've made it for me mum." So all songs from his, like I say, from his childhood, Sentimental Journey, Night and Day, Whispering Grass, that type of thing, Love is a Many Splendid Thing. And I suppose Ringo has got the vocals really for this type of music, but it doesn't sound too bad. It might sound a bit flat here and there, but the actual arrangements are excellent. Behind Ringo's voice is an excellent big band, and he's got some big time arrangers on here. Got Quincy Jones and George Martin. Paul McCartney does one. Everybody, there's a different one for every song. Klaus Woolman does one, as does Maurice Gibb from the Bee Gees, Richard Perry, John Dankworth, Elmer Bernstein, Les Reed. There's a few big names there. And the resulting album isn't too bad. Not one I would play very often. It just completes your collection really. But maybe play this now and again to have a quick listen just to remind myself of what it's like. But really, Ringo was ahead of the game with this album, because many years later, many big time rock and pop stars started to make albums like this. I know Paul McCartney's done one, and Bob Dylan, he did that one called Triplicate, which is a favourite of mine. And in the 70s, Brian Ferry from Roxy Music, he did a solo album. Well, These Splendid Things, I can't think what it's called, something like that. So really, he was ahead of the game on that one. They probably didn't quite realise he was ahead of the game, but there again he was. And also, another fact, this is possibly, well, I think it is, the first solo album what contains music of a normal form, because John and Yoko, their first couple of albums were experimental, to say the least, or first three albums, and then George put out Electronic Sound, another experimental album, plus George also did the soundtrack album to Wonderwall. But I think this is the first solo album, I think, with proper music, not experimental or soundtrack. Okay, so I'm very good at this too. Came out in March 1970, recording started in August '69, and it's on the dark green and white UK Apple label, and this is a 1970 original. Okay, we'll move on to the second one, Beaucoups Blues. Now this time Ringo tackles country and western. And you can see some of the songs there. This was also released in 1970, so in 1970 Ringo Starr put out 2 albums, it's not bad. There's the gatefold. Again, this is on the dark green UK Apple label. How this came about, I think Ringo was working with George on George's album All Things Must Pass, and George got Pete Drake in to play pedal steel guitar on one of the songs, and he said to Ringo, why don't we go to Nashville and make a country and western album? Ringo was a bit sceptical, but nevertheless Pete Drake talked him into it, and off they went at some point, and this is the resulting album. I think this is very, very good. It doesn't really get spoken about that much, but I think it's one of his best, and he should have done a volume 2. Maybe sometime in the 70s or 80s, but it's possibly too late to do one now, but a volume 2 would have been nice. I know John Lennon wrote a song for Ringo, or intended it to be for Ringo, Life Begins at 40, and that was country and western, so he could have done a country and western album at some point with that song. But I think it would have been on Ringo's 1981 album had things been different. So here we go then. Beaucoups Blues with a great cover. Ringo's pondering there. What do I do next after being in the greatest rock and roll band of all time? So he's thinking of his options there. I like that cover. Ringo's albums just tend to be, you know, like that. Smile and sunglasses. Similar cover every time and similar music. So really, why don't you do a country and western one at some point? You know, a few years back would have been good. Right, okay. Third and final one of this little run. We all possibly know this one. This is Ringo's 1973 album, Ringo, containing musicians such as John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, Mark Bolan, Harry Nilsson, Klaus Voormann, and so on. And John contributed 1 song to Ringo, Paul contributed 1 song, George did 3, and it is a really, really fine album, no question about this. This stands up with anything the Beatles did in the early days, early 70s should I say, the solo Beatles. Booklet inside by Klaus Voormann, no less. So he's got some big time talent on this album, so you would expect a fine album. So the label on this time, departure from it's on Apple, but it's got Ringo on the cover, on the label, which is what solo Beatles tended to do in those days. Now John put his photograph on the Imagine label. Paul did the same for Wings Wildlife, I think it was that one. George put his photograph on Dark Horse. So a bit of a theme that was for the solo Beatles to have your photograph on the cover. Started by John. Right, so there we have it. Ringo Starr's first 3 albums, and I recommend them, I really do. Okay, bye for now.